weaving, woodwork, whatever. And these valued crafts were often handed down from father to son and in the family. But England's Industrial Revolution, first country in the world to industrialise, 1760, 1840 was the revolution. But I want you to look at the population of England on the side there. 1700, 5.2 million. 1770, which is just after the Industrial Revolution, is 6.4, 1798, and so on. In that last 20 years there, from 1811 to 1831, a 15.5% increase in population. So England's population is growing, and the working conditions in those factories at first were very poor. You had all sorts of things happening. You're likely to die there, lose a limb, and people are now moving to the city because weaving and things like that, knitting garments and all of that, was now done in a factory, and the people who were doing it at home were really out of a job, so they moved to the cities. And children as young as 6 were employed. If you see that little graph I've got there, 14% of those children there were under 12, I believe, no, under 14. So the others are over 14. But children had little fingers. They could manipulate things easier than adults, and they were employed. And they worked long hours with very little pay. Often they were orphans and they were given some sort of rough accommodation and taken to work all the time. Women were in factories, as you can see there. What's the chance, looking at those long dresses there, what's the chance of those getting caught in those cogs and machinery? And very poor conditions. There were no rules of occupational health and safety at that time. This did come later with unionism. That's a map of England. The cities there still had some cities there. Looking at 1701, you did have population, the orange is the higher population, green. I don't think there's any on that particular map that's green. But look over here, after the Industrial Revolution, that's 1911, I believe, and you can see where the population is now. They've moved to the cities. So when you move to the city, and you have a city, and you've got poor people that have poor housing, and they maybe can't get a job, there's no social security, what do? They turn to crime. Some of them, not all of them. You can see there you've got this posh lady and posh gentleman, because he's a bit of a sucker for the ladies, and this girl's flirting with him there, and somebody's picking his pocket. But the others, you can see, dressed in rags and often living on the street, trying to just live and stay alive. So many rich, others poor, great divide in society. Now, crimes and punishment at that time, stealing, murder and rape, death sentence, but there were over 200 crimes that got the death sentence at that time. Even being a pickpocket, you could get the death sentence. So at this time, there was high death from illness and things, so killing someone to get rid of them was quite common. It's not as common in the world today to have that type of punishment. Now, what happened then? They drew up the British Transportation Act. That's 1718. Why? Because killing someone didn't seem to stop crime. It doesn't seem putting them in jail doesn't stop it today. That time, even killing them didn't stop crime, and crime was increasing. And there was a great need for labour in Britain's colonies. Now, at that time, that's the Old Bailey, the picture there of the Old Bailey, and you could be sentenced to 7 years for petty crimes. Instead of, you could be branded, whipped, or jailed. But now transportation comes in, and after formal sentencing to death, you could appeal and you could be transported if that seemed a better idea to you. Now, remember I said Great Britain's colonies needed labour. 1718 to 1775, 52,000 British prisoners were shipped to the United States of America, or the 13 colonies there. And that's what they feel, the number that were sent there. And it was mainly for farming, sugar and tobacco growing. And you'll notice in that illustration there are slaves coming ashore as well. Britain at that time still supported slavery. What changed? It's all America's fault that Australia was settled. I've had Americans here. Yeah, it's your fault. Australia was settled. Because you had this War of Independence in 1775, which dramatically changed what Britain was going to do with these people they had in jails. Now, their prisons and hulks of old wooden ships were overflowing. So you can see there in that illustration, it's an old painting, these hulks are ex-Navy ships, and they're beached or anchored along the banks of the rivers, and they sent the prisoners to them. And they would go out and work in the day, but they were on the ships. And they continued to house prisoners for up to 82 years. And that's a close-up of a prison ship in Portsmouth, and convicts are going on board. And they often were on there before they were put onto ships to be transported. So that's our story in England. Here enters James Cook, as you're well aware. He discovered Australia's east coast, which no one had found, no European had found to that time. And he searched for the fabled Great South Land, or Terra Australis Incognita. So across from New Zealand, he gets to Victoria, and then on to Botany Bay, 29th of April 1770. And he had with him Sir Joseph Banks, who was a botanist. And when he went back to England,